panel, and people are welcome to keep eating and having their lunch. I really respect our speakers, and we're very, very happy to have this panel with us.
Do you want to go first?
That's going to be moderated by Maggie Fox of Climate Reality Project. Thank you very much.
Third. Okay.
And then I'll go last.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for letting us interrupt your lunch for a few minutes. I'm Maggie Fox. I'm the president and CEO of the Climate Reality Project. I usually think that sitting to do panel conversation isn't the wisest. So if you don't mind, I'm going to move up here and invite my participants to do the same if they so desire. Hi there, once again. I have to take a moment before I introduce our panelists to tell you that I haven't been able to be here for the last couple of days. I had some other commitments and I've caught up just a little bit with some of what's gone on, but I can tell that the last couple of days have been extraordinary and that there are some really amazing people here. The other reason I hadn't been able to join you is I'm from Boulder, Colorado, where there are a number of other wonderful women, and we have just lived through a week of climate reality, a kind of extreme weather biblical event that actually has brought home in a very personal way our work and helped me to understand for the first time, really, I'm embarrassed to say, how powerful climate change is in a very personal way. A lot of the work of my organization is designed to bring that personal voice and story, but I have to admit I never really knew until a week ago how dirty weather, as we have called extreme weather caused by climate pollution, not only changes the external reality of your life in some very powerful and permanent ways, it also changes one inside. And I think a lot of why we are here is both our intuitive knowledge as women, but also our work has helped us to understand that personal transformation and how difficult it is for so many people in the world. And a number of panelists earlier today that I think spoke to that. So I just had to take a moment to bring that reality into this conversation. And we all acknowledge our panelists, who are three really extraordinary women, surrounded by a room full of extraordinary women, who are joining us today to talk about mobilizing global support for women and climate solutions. The first is Julia Marton-Lefevre on my far right, who will actually be our second speaker, and then Jody Williams, who will be our third speaker, and Andrea Santy. Each one of these women have done amazing work and are doing amazing work, but as I spoke about with Osprey, we're not doing introductions because everyone here is smart enough to read their bios and probably all of them anyway. So let me just take a moment to talk about the work of the Climate Reality Project. A number of years ago, I heard a statistic that's commonly used that there are 2 million organizations in the world today working on climate change. The first time I heard it, I was like, really, this seems one of those overblown numbers, and who could count, and how would you do it? Over the last couple of years, I think I've come to the realization that it's probably accurate. I have no idea, and I really don't know where that number came from. But when you think about the number of individuals, whether they're in a village, in a community, a state, a country, and around the world, who are actually working on this issue in some way or another, it doesn't defy our ability to believe that there are 2 million organizations of varying sizes. But oddly enough, with that fact comes the second truth, which is that those organizations, no matter how powerfully they are doing really great work, it's not coming together in a way that mobilizes the kind of action that has brought us together. And that's why we're here. And that is a lot of what the Climate Reality Project has been working to try to sort out how to do. The piece that we have chosen is to think about creating a common language. Over the last couple of days, some of the myriad complexities and terrifying aspects of climate have been shared with you. For most people who are not already with us, who haven't joined the tribe of those who are feeling urgent and clear that this reality must be embraced and faced, talking with them at the level that we are talking with each other actually doesn't really work. Largely because the size and scope of this reality, very first thing for me is it's not an issue. This is not an issue. This is a reality. And facing that reality is a key first step to moving ourselves and all of us together on to a different place. So I would say the notion of finding a common language around the world, a common way of framing a conversation about climate is a critical step. And have spent, and will continue to spend a lot of time. The first is that climate change is real. The second is that it's happening now. It's not just in time or place. The third is that we are actually doing it, therefore we can change what we're doing to do something about it. We're the cause and we are the solution. That there is one single common cause, although a policy wonk in all of us knows that there are many different pollutants, but the single biggest and most powerful is carbon pollution. And at the end of the day, there's one solution, even though it has to encompass enormous complexity from a policy perspective. And that is putting a price on carbon. Whether we're talking about reparation, or whether we're talking about funding new technologies, or whether we're talking about a new 21st century, if you don't have a price on carbon manifested all over the world, not just in the developing world, but in the developed world, there is not the economic solution that we know to drive this forward. So finding that language about we're all already paying the price of carbon pollution, the numbers of extreme weather and sea level rise and forced migrations far exceed whatever it would take to move us into a clean energy economy. But the storytelling that we need to do to make it clear to people who are experiencing climate change all over the world, but don't actually know that these costs that they are paying, both in the incalculable sense of their personal losses and the calculable sense in terms of what is happening to our world, actually have to be calculated. Have to be calculated, because when you calculate what we are already paying for carbon pollution, the notion that it's difficult to shift to a clean energy economy becomes not only laughable, but politically untenable. So the whole premise of mobilizing is first finding a way to identify common cause and common solution in a language that actually pulls us together rather than drives us apart. I think I have very little time left. Our timekeeper is diligent, actually helping me see that, and there's much that I'd love more to share with you, but that would mean you wouldn't get to hear from our panelists, and it also would mean we couldn't have a conversation after. So let me pause and say, we are doing our third annual 24 Hours of Reality live-streamed event on October 22nd and 23rd. We travel around the world with a video camera sharing the stories of what is happening where people are already paying the price of carbon pollution. We've built a carbon calculator so that anyone who is live streaming with us will actually be able to talk about their personal cost of carbon. And we're going to start tallying that cost so that we can actually present it to world leaders. So I hope you'll join us, and particularly I look forward to the conversation we have after these amazing panelists. So Julia, how about you come next?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you. So the name of this panel is Mobilizing Global Support for Women and Climate Solutions, and that's obviously why I've been asked to join it, because I run a very global organization which tries to look at these complexities that you just referred to, Maggie, through a global lens, which makes it even more complicated. Of course, it's really encouraging to note that today more and more countries are beginning to respond to what used to be the invisible half of population in the context of climate change, as well as with regard to the broader environment and development issues. But now what we have to really look at is how do we accelerate this and to mobilize global support for many of the solutions that exist. So I think you will have already heard some of the stories from IUCN's senior gender advisor Lorena Aguilar, that I'm very proud of the fact that IUCN has led the way. IUCN, which is not a very sexy acronym, I'm sorry to say, I didn't invent it, is the International Union for Conservation of Nature. We were formed in 1948 by a lot of men, I must say, and they did have a very brilliant idea, and that was to include in our membership something that people still dream about, but it's very difficult to do. We have it. We have both NGOs and governments. So when we talk about a multi-stakeholder approach to complex global problems, it's very important to sit together. They left out the private sector. That would have been even more brilliant. And they didn't really refer to the role of women in all this, I must say. But nevertheless, I'm very proud to tell you that we are really the first international environmental institution which has started to work on gender equality in the context of the environment since 1984. That's not as long ago as our founding of 1948, but still since 1984. Now, I should tell you that today we have 1,300 members. That includes 1,000 NGOs, big and small, in all parts of the world. And we have a very privileged seat representing everything that we're talking about here at the United Nations. We're a so-called permanent observer. That means that we get to speak on behalf of governments, on behalf of nature, right after government. Of course, we also speak on behalf of all our members, but that's a powerful position. So what have we been doing? First of all, our vision is a just world that values and conserves nature. And I should tell you immediately that for us, conservation of nature is not something that's done on the side. It's not protected areas behind a fence. It is conservation of nature must contribute actively to human well-being. We are indeed a part of nature. And nature provides us life support. So once we understand that, we will start to recognize its rights to exist, but we do need to understand that. So one important achievement has been, and we've been there influencing this for many years, is that governments have recently equipped all the 3 Rio conventions with strong mandates on gender equality and women's empowerment. And we've been playing a very strong role ever since all this has happened. We have a gender plans of action for all of the conventions and also for the Climate Investment Fund. So we are there pushing our way. So by signing and ratifying the conventions on biodiversity, which by the way were invented by the members of IUCN already in 1981, on climate change and on desertification, governments now officially commit to implement the provisions about gender, and we have to monitor this. Now, the important thing about this discussion about global mobilization is to see how we get it actually embedded in national and local policies. And that's not so easy, but we've got to do that. So what we have done at IUCN through our Global Gender Office is that we have put together a climate change gender action plans. We call that CC GAPS, also another acronym. And we started in 12 different countries and regional bodies, helping governments navigate the learning curve of empowering women in their climate change policies and plans. Somebody this morning referred to the fact that unless we've got legal frameworks, it's just not going to work. So far these CC GAPs have been established in Mozambique, in Jordan, in Egypt, in Tanzania, in Nepal, Haiti, Panama, Costa Rica, Liberia, Bangladesh, the Arab states, and the Central American region. And the results are really positive. In countries where we have carried out these processes, these CC GAPs have successfully put women at the center of national and international climate change policy. So after 20 years of gender equality being absent from the climate change agenda, these CC GAPs, these climate change gender action plans, which are very specific, are helping countries to turn the corner toward more inclusive and effective climate change responses, and women's empowerment is no longer elusive. It's really a part of the system. And I think I always like to say that one of my secret agendas in my job as Director General of IUCN, by the way, only the second one, and I don't think I got this job because I'm a woman, but hopefully I've empowered many others. I've always said that I think it's just very important for all of us to infiltrate the systems which make those decisions. And once we infiltrate the systems are going to change. Let me just give you a couple of quick examples from some of the countries that are represented here. In Nepal, Mozambique, and Tanzania, women's leadership and gender equality are new elements of national and regional climate change policies. So laws are being written. The Ministerial Environmental Council of the League of Arab States has finally put gender on its agenda, again through the influencing of these CC gaps. In Liberia, Tanzania, Jordan, and Egypt, the governments made a new commitment to feature gender equality in their reporting under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is huge to think of these countries that had not thought about these issues before. These CC gaps have further inspired the governments of Jordan, Nepal, Tanzania, and Costa Rica to build capacity to respond to the gender aspects of climate change. So, for some of these countries, as you very well know, these steps forward represent the first time that global mandates on gender and environment are being translated into action. And Lorena, I think you need to work in this country as well. I haven't heard the United States mentioned in the work, but we've got a lot of work to do. But these policy action plans are giving us the instruments to make sure that women's voices are really mainstream, not just in words, because the fact that we've said that the gender issues are now finally mainstreamed in these conventions, these important conventions, but they've got to do it through actions. And for that, it is extremely important to have the legal frameworks inside the different countries. So this is just to finish, because I see the zero sign coming up. This is why IUCN was a founding member of the Global Gender and Climate Alliance, which is represented here, and which has now more than 80 members strong, including intergovernmental organizations, NGOs, and UN agencies. So that's, again, very important for us to be working together to make sure that mainstreaming isn't just a title. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Andrea Santy. I'm the director of World Wildlife Fund's Russell E. Train Education for Nature program. And WWF was actually one of the organizations that was working in partnership with IUCN.
We created you.
Yeah.
IUCN gave birth to WWF.
And Lorena came to WWF a few years ago and helped us work on our gender task force and looking at how to really mainstream gender into the programs. It was happening kind of case by case, but not holistically. So I think that it has really come full circle. So it's a real honor to be here today with so many accomplished women. The past few days have been really inspiring. I'd like to have a special thank you to Rosemary, who was really instrumental in bringing us here today. Rosemary has received support from us. A quick history. We talked a little bit, but WWF was started in 1961. It's one of the oldest global conservation organizations in the world. We work through a network of offices in over 100 countries worldwide. We have over 1.2 million members in the United States and nearly 5 million globally. WWF began its work on climate in the 1980s by looking at how climate change was affecting biodiversity. Next slide. And just as our logo has evolved, our approach to climate change has also evolved. Instead of just looking at it as a singular focus, energy. And two is to ramp up solar, rooftop solar, to make solar fun, easy, and popular. a lot of words that I've heard everybody already talking about. Through the campaign, WWF is not trying to do this on our own. We're just mobilizing our large membership, and we hope that we can contribute our part to the great work that so many of you are already doing. Today, more than 4 in 10 women are either the sole or primary source of income in their families. Many of you have already talked about women's purchasing power. And so as women and as consumers, I think that we can make a very conscious decision about the type of energy we use and be advocates in our communities for renewable energy and making a very visible statement by putting solar on our rooftops. So I want to transition a little bit from the work in the US to some of the work that I do internationally. Next slide. Okay, so WWF works mainly in places with high biological diversity. We work in the Amazon, the Congo, the Himalayas, among many other places. And the real work that's being done is being done by people like you who are on the ground. And so one of the ways that I think that we can really mobilize women for climate solutions is by building capacity. But there's a lot of challenges to building capacity. There's still very limited opportunities. Many universities do not have degrees in conservation biology or in anything related to conservation. There's also still very limited opportunities to get advanced training for conservation-related fields, or gender for that matter. There's language barriers, so when you look at where is training happening, and there is still a huge imbalance between training that's being offered in English and training that's being offered in Spanish, and even less that's being offered in French or native languages. There's a rural and urban imbalance. Most of the people who are getting training are coming from urban areas. Indigenous people are still largely excluded from a lot of the training that's going on. And there's obviously a gender gap. And so I want to talk a little bit about what WWF is doing to try, or our program is trying to do. We support people from Asia, Africa, and Latin America to get training and education. We've supported over 1,700 individuals worldwide. We've invested nearly $14 million. And we really want to look at what can we do right now. And so we're providing support right now to build faculty. We're offering faculty fellowships, trying to build faculty members' competencies in 6 countries around the world. And we're also providing exchanges. So through our different programs, women, and many of you here can apply and go and meet with the other people you've met, the other women, and be empowered and continue this dialogue. Over the next 5 years, we will be increasing the number of grants twofold. And so hoping to really double the number of people, which still is just a shot, small part. But we're hoping that that'll be able to help increase and provide opportunities, open doors, and allow women to find their mission and fulfill it through education and training. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Jody Williams. I chaired the Nobel Women's Initiative, which is 6 women recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize who came together to try to use whatever influence and access we have because of the Peace Prize, to spotlight the work of women and women's organizations around the world working for sustainable peace with justice and equality. And one element of sustainable peace with justice and equality, of course, is climate change. So we have become increasingly involved in issues related to climate change, particularly the tar sands discussions, leading a delegation from the tar sands along the proposed Gateway pipeline that would go to the West Coast in Canada, trying to meet with First Nation women and other women in Canada who have been raising their voices against this pipeline and trying to connect them. One of the things that I find, and it still amazes me after all these years, I've been an activist, grassroots activist for 32 years, and still amazes me is that people somehow don't seem to understand the power of working in coalition, which I mentioned earlier this morning. Nobel Women is all about coalition. It's not about us, it's about helping bring women together so they can express their point of view. I was fortunate to help create the international campaign to ban landmines. I'm now fortunate to be part of a campaign that we are bringing together to stop rape and gender violence and conflict. I've also been very proud to be part of a brand new initiative to stop killer robots, which are not drones, they are Terminator, that are being developed around the world. And in every instance, what I have found and seen is that by working in coalition at every level, from, people working in their own community or in their county level or nationally or regionally, when you combine those voices, the speed with which you can bring about change is so dramatic that it amazes me. No, please, don't waste time with clapping. When we launched the Killer Robot campaign in April, nobody was talking about it. Now we have governments in a short period of time all over the world seizing this issue, and it's because we talk to each other. Getting together in a summit is awesome. However, talking to each other regularly is way more awesome and way more powerful. I got here last night from Norway and Sweden, so I'm a bit out of it in terms of the conversation, of course, from the other day. But I keep hearing, we need support. We need your support from all levels of people conversing here. We need your support, to me, translates into, if we were in a coalition, we would know when you need support. I mean, even Bill, when he spoke, he talked about, we do our work and we come together when it's necessary. That's good. 350 does great work. I'm a member of 350 Vermont because they're trying to put a bitumen tar sands pipeline through my pristine state, and then New Hampshire to Maine, so I'm furious personally as well. But when you know what the other people in your coalition are doing, it's really a matter of knowledge and sharing the information which profoundly increases your power. When we did the landmine campaign, we would develop an overarching strategy. We'd like to see this happen in 6 months. We'd like to see this happen in a year. And we would assess, did it work, didn't it work? But in between all of that, each campaign in each country carried out the action that they could do that fit in the overarching strategy. And I was the coordinator, and that simply meant I was the spider in the middle of the web, and I made sure that the Cambodian campaign's success was told to every other campaign in the world. And we went from 2 NGOs and a staff of 1 MOA to 1,300 in 90 countries around the world. And I really saw my function in the coalition was saying, okay, this is happening in Ecuador right now. Is there anything you can do in your own situation that would support it? This is what the women in Mexico who are the indigenous populations who are fighting the extraction industries in Guatemala, they are being forced, met with this force right now by the military. What can we do? It increases our power so geometrically that I would invite this summit to really think about what's going to happen after. I mean, I'm excited about the declaration and the agenda and all that, but how's it going to be implemented? Just like you were talking about the framework, you know, the legal frameworks, if they're not implemented, they're irrelevant. You know, when we achieved the Mind Ban Treaty, we were like, yes, but that was the beginning of the work. We gave every country there our action plan to make that beautiful words on paper into actual reality on the ground for people who are living in that situation. So I would just hope that at least some of the groups here, or all, would be better, would set up a system of communication and helping each other. I would end with one other thing. Nolene was very forceful, and I appreciated it very much. I like force, especially forceful women. And she talked about one of the elephants in the room, which was the corporate network that really controls the planet. Another elephant in the room that we haven't really discussed is the military and the militarization of this planet. And I think Ted Turner talked about it very briefly. The United States of America spends more on its military than every other country in the world combined. Our country alone, if we cut that thing by 2/3, think of what we could do for the environment. We have to confront what countries are doing in our names with our money to so-called defend us, when that is not what national security is about. And how many times in the history of the extractive industries in particular have soldiers been called out to crush the protests of indigenous communities when they are protesting the extraction industries? We need to address them too. They're very, unfortunately, an important part of the discussion. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for the woo-woo. I also want to thank the, I'm sorry I can't remember your name, but I remember the power of your voice about civil disobedience. Civil disobedience, you know. The Nobel woman sounds like Mother Teresa or a new sainthood. We ain't. We are radical women who work radically for change. Nice women do not change the world. Thank you.
So now we begin the fun part, which is the conversation. Conversation between women is always, as Jody has told us, an important part of our work. So let's open it to, and actually Osprey will walk around and hand out after I sort of point to one of you. And our timekeeper will let me know when we're getting close. Okay, good. Open that up, and let me see some hands of individuals that might want to ask a question or two. First one is at the back of the room, so
I just want to make a quick comment. First of all, thank you for this wonderful panel. Before we go into the Q&A, we are going to be having a panel session this afternoon around 3 o'clock, depending on how we're meeting our time clock here, where we're actually going to be talking about what Jody's bringing up is how we are going to be creating a network and coalition from all the work that's happening here for the follow-up. So it's not a one-off event here at the summit, that we really can, as you all know, carry the implementation programs forward and how we're going to do that. So we have a session that we're calling a brainstorm specifically to address this. So I'm really glad that you created that wonderful, powerful segue for us to head into that session with.
Thank you so much for this really inspiring panel by so many folks I inspires. I work in the Amazon, and biodiversity was mentioned, IUCN, World Wildlife Fund, and even the Climate Connection. Given that when you look at indigenous peoples' territories, something like 80% of the world's biodiversity is in indigenous lands, why is it that still only less than 0.1% of philanthropic dollars go to support indigenous empowerment and indigenous rights approach to conservation and to protecting the world's remaining tropical rainforest, which is critical for our climate? I want to hear, given how much we spend on conservation around the planet, how is this going to shift in a way that's going to empower the true stewards? Love to hear IUCN, WWF, any of you.
Well, I think we really have to move toward a whole different economic paradigm. We very much favor the idea of paying for the stewards of our environment, payment for ecosystem services.
Right.
We're going to have to introduce that into the economic system. It's not easy, but that's where we're fighting, so that it will become obvious that the stewards of our environment, that are not only looking after their own territories, but for all of humanity, even if it's people living on the other side of the planet, should be looked after and paid for their services of stewardship, and you all have to help us with that. Again, as I just mentioned very quickly, for us the message now is not to bemoan the fate of nature, but rather to turn it around to show that nature provides solutions to all of us, not only for the people who live in it and who take care of it for us, but for all of us. And therefore, we're going to have to set up a system whereby it will be obvious, not just philanthropy, but a part of each country's economic system, to make sure that that nature is looked after properly. And with the population issue that was mentioned this morning, 9.5 billion of us, which is I think where we're heading, we're going to have to learn some discipline and a new way of behaving.
Thanks.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
You want to comment?
So, yeah, mine is kind of a practical solution. So, someone was saying, how do we get the funds to the people around the world? And my simple answer was, you send it. Like, that's what I do every day. I send money to people. But I do know that for a lot of our grantees that come from indigenous organizations or indigenous communities, it's so much harder to get the funds there. There aren't bank accounts. Just kind of customary, how do you fill out a technical report? How do you report on the financials? I mean, just really basic things that make the ability to provide the funding harder. And we really seek to support Indigenous women, Indigenous communities, and we have a real lack of applicants. And so I think that it is kind of one is the practicality of opening the bank account and making sure that you have the ability to get the funds, and the other is really having the women here and others spread the word to say, hey, look, there's opportunities, and walking with them hand in hand to say, and this is how you get them. So that's just a real practical.
Can I just say one quick thing? You asked why. Apart from that, I mean, fundamentally, it's the racism in the world, isn't it? Fundamentally, it's a systematic destruction of indigenous cultures everywhere in the world, because they are stewards of the land and because they do have resources on the land. So it's yet another aspect of the problem that needs to be directly confronted. We don't feel it so much here, but out in the world, it's certainly a huge reason why. What? Do you? I apologize.
But I must say, I think here is one practical solution for the coalition that you, Jody, called for, and that is to let's make sure that the money that's needed can go to the right places, and you all can tell us from your different parts of the world, including to the indigenous peoples who perhaps don't know how to do the applications the way we like to see them. Let's help.
Can I just add one thing? I come from a political background, and I was talking with Laura Seidel about this for just a minute. When you run a political campaign, whether it's an issue campaign or a candidate campaign, you can't win unless you touch people. But the individual or the issue that reaches out can't touch every single person, so you must do something which in politics is called cutting turf. Cutting turf means you actually look at the entire campaign, you actually put it on the wall, and you decide where your priorities are. To the point that Les made, which is that 80% of the biodiversity exists within indigenous communities, is a piece of information that allows you to make a priority decision that the climate community has never made. That's real. That isn't necessarily anything more than an additional piece of information than what Jody has said and the others have said, but we are capable in this room and around the climate community in the world of putting our priorities on the wall and making decisions. We have passed the time when we can fail to do that any longer. It is not easy, because not everything is first and not everything is second. But the courage and the clarity that comes both from women and because we are at a moment in time when we have no time left to stall, I would argue that this conversation is literally about making those decisions and then acting upon them, instead of forgetting to do that. How about another question? Back in the back, black sweater, who's had her arm up from the beginning, and thank you. And then we'll move. Sorry, I can't see your face.
Thank you very much for the very amazing initiatives that you have shared with us. And talking about youth specifically, well, as a university professor, I have thousands of students from environmental engineering, but also from oil engineering. And the students from oil engineering are really aware of the environmental crisis and the impacts of their jobs, but they cannot find a solution because in my country, for example, it is, despite of our beautiful law on the rights of Mother Earth, an environmental engineer or a biologist can find easily a job, and an oil engineer finds a job as soon as he or she gets out of the university. So capacity building and education are key to find the solutions that we want, but the next step should be the creation of green jobs. And green jobs has been a subject for youth advocacy since COP15, and we don't see great results. So what do you think that needs to be done to have this become a reality? Thank you.
Yeah, so my program's really small within WWF, but so essentially one of the things that I'm so proud of is how many of the people who we've supported go back and start their own NGOs. And so we provide follow-up funding, but I think that when we need to multiply the number of you that are out there. And I think that when we have more people who are able to really be the advocates, it will increase the number of people who are working in conservation. We really are a small group in comparison to what we're fighting against, which is business and industry. And so I don't have a solution, but I think that you can see each one of you is an example of how we can grow and we can be bigger.
Can I say, at the end of the day, the market for solutions from the point of view of those who are seeking to drive that conversation, the individuals, wherever they are in the world, is far in excess of the demand. And the demand is lacking because we actually haven't funded the solutions. The 21st century clean energy economy, there's millions of people around the world. That's one of the most painful things to run an organization like any of us does, is the number of young and really talented people who have gotten themselves into educational institutions and the marketplace for their skills doesn't exist. Which is one of the reasons we went back to the notion of putting a price on carbon, because unless and until we create that incentive, it becomes the work of small organizations, no matter how big or how small the budgets of the charitable institutions are that we all work for. It is insufficient to meet the demand of those individuals who could power our future. So at the end of the day, we've got to be demanding a price on carbon, because a price on carbon gets at the core source, which is the funding out of the hands of the fossil fuel industry and back into the hands of those of us who could drive that economy. Any other comments? Or no, let's ask more. Yeah. So where's why don't we move over here to this part of the room, right here, this woman. It looks like Amy. I can see her with now then the light.
Thanks, Maggie. Amy Christensen. I was on a panel yesterday and we were talking about just transitions, and one thing that I raised and I really wanted your view on was the whole question of corporations. And we talked about fighting corporations, but then also I know WWF works with corporations too, who are helping to be part of the solution. And so I think it's a real conundrum, and we've had this back and forth, I think, in the discussions here about how we're fighting certain corporations, and yet we're working with others to be part of the solution because of the infrastructure and the capital they have to bring to this challenge. And so I was hoping if a couple of you could comment on that. And and how that works, because even the commodification of nature and the price for ecosystem services, there's been concerns that that really just limits it to the value to humans. And so these are all related questions, so I'd love your views on that. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to start. I mean, WWF, actually, all the WWFs are members of IUCN, and you've all voted for us actually not to, I wrote down what you said, not to fight against business and industry, but rather to work with business and industry to try to steadily change the behavior so that their footprint on the planet is used in a much more intelligent way. Don't forget, we all buy the goods from business and industry. Most of you drove here or flew here. I'm afraid you didn't do it on solar power yet. So our view is, and I think that is a view actually of our members, is not to fight, but to accept that they are there, and many of us have family members even who work for business and industry. They may not all be evil, they're just not well informed, and to work with them, to inform them based on good scientific knowledge as to how to start to change the paradigm. But don't forget, at the end of the day, it is all what's in our heads, in our consumer patterns, in our patterns of living. And the moment that we start changing the market with the carbon tax, with the carbon pricing carbon, I totally agree with you, then I think businesses will change. So my view is a little bit different from yours on that. Thank you.
I wanted to say one thing. Somebody spoke about Norway and how wonderful it is, and I certainly personally am very fond of Norway. But Norway's money from its oil, its fund, is not used for the world. It's used for Norway, period. And Norway, as marvelous as it is heavily involved in the tar sands. So even a country that is marvelous and involved in peace is also very involved in messing up the climate. So we have to look beneath the surface sometimes.
Can I make a comment? I don't want to interrupt the applause, but can I make a comment about Cami? Right now, the notion of fighting or partnering as if there's a duality is not real. In every case, all of us are doing both all the time. If we don't drive a cultural conversation that begins in every community and travels around the world, that carbon pollution is killing us, then we can't actually make a shift. The notion of a price on carbon doesn't have to do with fighting corporations, it has to do with equity. When you pollute, you have to pay for that pollution. We aren't doing that, and we are where we are today. That doesn't make someone evil, it's just what's happening. So it doesn't have to be viewed as fighting. It has to do with reestablishing equity and understanding that a common solution, which has existed in a policy context all over the world for a very long time, is a policy framework that can move us forward. That's not fighting, that's articulating reality and rebalancing it. That doesn't also mean that when you work as an organization in partnership with any given company or suite of companies, that doesn't mean you can't disagree with another. And I don't know about you, but in my family, we don't agree all the time. We also work together, but we also disagree. The notion of it being that you can't do both is not real, and I would argue that our capacity as women and as leaders allows us to do both all the time and continue to learn from it. But it doesn't step away from the fundamental reality that carbon pollution has to be paid for. And we have to get there.
And I would kind of second that WWF does partner with large corporations regularly, and I think that that's actually the direction WWF is moving towards. But I also know that I'm trying to keep a huge mega gas station out of my community, and so when I say fight, I also know that from my very personal point of view, there is a difference between what my organization is doing and how, when you're on the ground, how does that feel? And so I think that that's part of why I selected the word fight. It's not WWF's really approach, but I think that there is a nuance, and when you're on the ground, and the question from someone from Bolivia, I think that that is often how it feels, is that it is a fight. So just to clarify.
And it is in some cases.
Just real quickly, I think it's important to acknowledge that Microsoft, as an example, has put a price on carbon across its operations
Right.
globally, voluntarily,
Right.
in order to drive reductions of its pollution through that incentive program. So they are,
Yeah, there are corporations
some are
doing
stepping forward.
No, there's I mean, we could have a whole panel on that, but I've got this big zero sitting here, and this big zero says there's a lot of other great things to do, so thank you all very much. You were fabulous, by the way.
So Andrea, so you're fighting the gas station in your neighborhood? Yes. Where do you go to pick up gas, or you never use
It's
a
a
car?
Costco gas station that hasn't been built yet, so we're fighting to
But
keep
where
it.
do you fill up your car? You don't use a car.
You know what, I do fill up my car, but, you know what, it's the difference of scale, I think. So the local gas station's not